It's been 250 days since we last filmed our corn pre-soaking video. And at that point in time, we left you telling you that we were going to come back and film the other part of the video and continue to bring you along for the journey that we were going to go on this year in developing our flower farm and turning this soil from barren, unhealthy soil to something healthy and thriving. And we didn't.
We abandoned the videos.
Right after we filmed that videos and everything started to go downhill, the weather hit us hard. We had tons of snow and rain, so much so that the ground in the field became saturated to the point that we barely could even walk out there to do any of the work that we needed to do to till the ground and to even get the plants in. And that was really the beginning of everything.
So with the tulips, we got them in the ground about 2 months later than really we should have with the move and also selling the new property. We didn't get them in the ground until Christmas Eve, which was a huge gamble. If we ended up with a pretty harsh winter with a lot of moisture, we were pretty much going to be screwed. But we had been having pretty mild winters for quite a few seasons, so what was the chance of that? We lost that bet. We had a lake sitting over where we had planted the tulips, planted them in late so they didn't even have roots established. And come spring, after the daffodils came up and we were starting our bouquet subscription and we were feeling stellar, tulips weren't really coming up.
No, and the ones that did come up really didn't have any usable heads on them, and it became evident that something had happened to those. We did just a little investigating. Didn't really matter at that point in time, but we did find out that they had pretty much rotted in the ground because there was no root established, because we got in so late. They couldn't deal with that moisture, and even at that point, if they had a hardy root at that point, it's questionable whether they would have made it with how much moisture that ground got and how long it takes for that moisture to wick through and move out of there. It really does hold on to it for a long time. But at that point, it wasn't the end of the world. You know, we still had amazing beds of ranunculus coming up, and we were feeling really good about those. They had beautiful plants, and we've always had good success with them, and we didn't feel like we had anything to worry about.
The ranunculus plants were looking so beautiful and healthy until they started developing a stem and the bud right before they would be ready to harvest, like a day or two. We were all of a sudden seeing stem claps, which was heartbreaking.
They were beautiful plants, and there was no sign that it should have been happening. And we started doing lots of research into it, trying to figure out what was going on. You know, we were digging up plants, looking at the corms, looking at the roots, looking for any sign that something was wrong, you know, fungus, mold. We were looking into the stems and dissecting the plants. We weren't really seeing anything that was going wrong. We even sent out tissue samples to our local ag department. And that's kind of where we first started to understand that there might be a problem and honing in on what the problem was.
So when we got the results back from the plant pathologist on the ranunculus, and we also sent them a handful of other samples from other plants, it came back showing no fungi, no disease, no virus. It did show that the plants were stressed, dehydrated, and nutrient deficient.
That came as a surprise to us because we were hand watering it every day because we didn't have our irrigation in by that point in time. So we were always trying to keep it an optimal amount of water, and we definitely knew that they weren't underwatered. We were checking the soil. We knew what we amended the soil with, so we knew what should be in there, and then we knew how often we were fertilizing it. So to come back to say that they were nutrient deficiency kind of across the board was really boggling to us. But you know, was the area that we went with and dug into further to eventually find out what was going on with it.
Along with the ranunculus, we were seeing symptoms in a lot of the other rows. Our sweet peas were not thriving. They were yellowing, turning purple. They weren't able to handle the weather fluctuations like they normally could. We were putting in healthy, vibrant transplants into the soil just to go back a couple days later, and they were just starting to yellow and shrivel. It was heart-wrenching to experience that, and that's on the brink of getting ready to plant all of our summer crop and our dahlias, which we had heavily invested in this year. We had to put a halt to everything until we could figure out what the heck were we doing. Were we looking at herbicide damage? Did the activated charcoal not help? Were we looking at disease? What the heck were we doing? Was the soil so terrible we didn't put enough in of the amendments that needed it? And so we really had to go back to the drawing board, figure out literally from the ground up what we did wrong, what weren't we doing, and what the heck we were missing that was causing this crop failure after crop failure.
Many assumptions that we made, which was not necessarily right, but led us down a path that in the end helped us understand what exactly was going on. We started to assume that we weren't amending it right, the soil, because that's what the tissue sample was saying. In our area, we don't have too many choices for compost. And we went with a high-quality aged manure that, as far as we could tell, had been aged for years upon years, and it looked really good.
And we used it previously.
And we had used it previously
With
at the other
success.
property, yeah, with a lot of success. And in the same ratios of application at the other property that we did here.
Looking at the problems with the soil, we began looking at everything, and one of the things we heavily began looking at was the amount of composted manure we had put into the beds. We also were wondering what was missing from that. So that is when we reached out to a local compost company that we've heard amazing things about. It's just pricey. And we began talking to the supplier, and we ended up getting a load, but they did caution us to only use about a 1/4 inch, an 1/8 of an inch, ideally to a 1/4 inch max per row, in which we gave them the measurements of a 3.5 by 50 foot row. And that kind of made us question, because we had read, no, you need to really put in a lot of quality compost, and aged manure is considered that, and their compost had much more than just aged manure.
We've continuously heard that we should be putting 2 to 3, upwards of 5 inches of quality compost when we amend the beds, and that really struck us when they were recommending something so much less than what everyone else had, and we knew the compost was good. And that really got us looking to understand why they were saying that. And one of the things that we noticed that was in their compost was wild horse manure, and we have a lot of wild horses in our area, and so we started kind of putting that together. It wasn't the base of their compost, but it was one of the components in it. Another thing that we noticed that we found really interesting is that they had an amendment in there, and that amendment was yucca, and we had actually never heard of yucca being used for an amendment before, and it piqued our interest, and so we had to look into it. And what it turns out, the yucca is used to flush salts, the salt buildup. It's actually really common in hydroponic systems to use it after a few weeks. So the main macronutrients, and even some of the other ones, not quite sure, the way they're molecularly built, they're attached to a salt, and that's, I guess, kind of like a carrying agent. And when it goes and is used by the plant uses that macronutrient, the nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, and then what's left behind is a salt. And so these hydroponic growers will use this to flush the roots of their plants to remove the salts. The interesting thing about the salt is we've heard time and time again that you don't want salt in your soil, but we didn't understand exactly in what form they're talking about, how it would get there, and then what it does. And the interesting thing is it actually locks the nutrients out. It locks the plant, the roots, from uptaking nutrients.
And uptaking water.
Yes. And this is kind of like a mind-blowing moment for us.
Ding, 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 ding!
Yeah, so,
we have a suspect.
Yeah.
And the great thing about the yucca, not only does it flush out the salts and things like that, but it does help the plant to better absorb water.
Yeah.
Even if you spray it on the leaves, it can help even on that kind of a level. So it's kind of one of those magical gardening things that we didn't know existed. And while we were grasping for straws, we decided to start flushing that soil.
Yeah.
With a watering can. By hand.
With this knowledge in hand, we kind of gathered all the information that we had come across, everything that we had learned, and we had a new game plan for going forward. We stopped using the manure pretty much altogether. We had a row that was heavily amended that we really, really needed, and so we did take that row and we spread it out over the other 6 rows that we were going to be amending, and we diluted that manure into the other rows. And then we went ahead forward with that high quality compost, and we did the application ratios that they recommended, which
for the dahlias, I think is what it covered.
Yeah, and that was our big thing, is that we had too much money into those dahlias, and we needed them at this point. We were banking on it. We had stopped and we had pulled back so much.
We were saying no to events. We put off being at our normal outlets. We put off going to farmers market. There was a lot that we had to pull back, which in the beginning of the season, this is not what we had anticipated.
We made all these changes to the soil, to the new rows that we had control over, and then we started moving forward. And luckily, it started working. Additionally, we started using yucca to flush the bad rows that we'd already planted. Things. It wasn't that it completely killed the plants. It really didn't. Some plants were more susceptible to it. Other plants weren't susceptible to this nutrient lockout and did just fine. And so the ones that were already there, we started flushing with yucca, and it started to make a difference. We could see it days after we did the flush. Thankfully, the rest of the season went pretty much without a hitch. Everything grew very nice. We didn't have certain varieties, we didn't have as big as we normally have, and they didn't produce as much as they normally would. But other varieties did absolutely stellar, and more than
best we've ever had.
The best we've ever had. And that's just the thing about the soil we're finding out. Some plants really need a lot of care, and the really fine-tuned soil for them, and other plants, they can take it and go with what they're given.
We like those plants. We like those plants, especially here in Nevada. We like those plants.
And luckily, the dahlias were the ones that turned out, to be one of those plants for us.
The dahlias redeemed us. They redeemed our season, and they brought us back on the scene for all our outlets just strong.
Yeah.
They restored our energy and our season, and they definitely filled our cup along with our customers, because in the end, people aren't going to weep as much about snapdragons, but if you don't have dahlias, that could be kind of a bummer. So as long as you have dahlias, what more do you need?
That's right. It was a nice end to the season that we didn't actually know it was the end of the season yet.
Merry Frostmas! It was our Merry Frostmas. Frostmas.
What's Merry Frostmas?
Frostmas. It is the Christmas of flower farmers. It's where the freeze comes and it wipes you out, and then it leaves you presents of dahlia tubers to dig up.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is the brink of the flower farmers' new year.
I agree. This is our new year, that's for sure.
Well, yeah.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button.
Don't forget the share button with all your friends.
It's the subscribe button. So make sure to hit that share button. And subscribe so you don't miss the rest of our content that we're rolling out with.
But you just called it a share button.
I know, because I was making fun of you.
Flower farmer, not a YouTuber. And as always, we are looking forward to handing you blooms